Welcome to a new episode of Muslim Billionaires, episode 11. Today, we're going to get right into it. It's something that I was thinking about, obviously. I always start these podcasts with things that I'm always currently thinking about. But one thing that I want us to start leveraging, and for me, this is something I remind myself every time, is leveraging fear. It's like literally, it's okay to be scared. You know, when you're approaching something that's bigger than you, I think approaching it with being scared is one of the fundamental things that come with not only your progress, but also come with being uncomfortable. If you're achieving and striving for something that's kind of unimaginable for the people around you and even for yourself, I think it's safe to say to be comfortable, also being comfortable by being uncomfortable too. I think being uncomfortable is one of the key ingredients to striving and progressing to where you're trying to get to. And it's a key thought that was crossing my mind, and I'm like, fear is just leveraged in society in a negative notion, but it could also be leveraged to yourself if you know how to channel it properly, right? And to execute it properly. To me, I've listed a lot of things in my head to what it is that I'm scared of. You know, one of the things that I think a lot of us is when we achieve success, how do people look at me for what it is? I think the only way I can answer that is the way I study some of the high-level successful people. They've kind of rationalized by people will always talk about you regardless, right? So to the levels that you're achieving, the people around you locally, and if you continue to achieve, maybe people around you or people start looking at your content or businesses that you're building, and maybe if it's international, now it's a global perception of what it is that you're doing. I think there's a certain level, a highest level of when somebody's makes up their mind of hating on you without any rational reason. Then there was an equation that one person said that was very interesting. They're like 1 + 1 = 5, right? And meaning when somebody says when you ask them what's 1 + 1, they say equals 5, right? To them, that's what it equals. And realistically, it equals 2. So you know what? That's fine. You take whatever it's been given and the way that you're thinking about what it is that it looks like, right? So to me, when that person was talking about it at the highest level, I was thinking about the smallest scale. I'm like, okay, so does it mean for us what it is? Like when you're achieving something, even the people around you start negatively looking at what you're building, and what do you say to yourself about it? And again, you just have to rationalize it with yourself and saying 1 + 1 = 5. To them, if they have invested their time and effort to just hate on you, whether it's behind your back or with other people, then to you should always rationalize by saying, you know what, that's who they are. The results of what you're building looks to them as something they can't imagine, but you put work in how you imagine things. And that should not cost in fear. That should cost in confidence, right? But we're humans. The element of fear is always going to be there, right? Our fear should be only to God. God is whom we always fear of, right? But to be scared and to be frightened about some certain things because you're uncomfortable with that outcome can come with it. But this is why God exists, right? You got to leave it to God and then put the effort in alongside of it. But simultaneously, we sometimes put the fear in the hands of other people, which again will start deviating from what your goals look like, you know. And that's the saddest part for those people. For those people that get stuck in that, they start to dissolve slowly but surely because of other people's opinions, right? Centering God and a lot of the achievements that you're trying to strive for is the most important thing to do. God is the one who opens the doors for you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who opens the doors for you, right? And if you're going by fear, then what is the purpose of striving towards that, right? Pray or worry, don't do both, right? It's a saying, right? You can't pray and worry at the same time. What is the purpose? It's just counterproductive to what you're trying to do. You leave it in God's hands, then when you're finished praying, you're still worried. Why? You just left it in God's hands. And the specialty of that is, if God has led you to that prayer and guided you to that prayer, right? Do you think that was by coincidence? Or has God, knowing everything is a decree of God, right, led you to that point of prayer? So why are you still questioning about what it is that you're leaving in God's hands? That's the question, right? Sometimes the outcome might not come to you quickly, but why are you scared of that? Why are you still in the control of the time that it should come to you? Have you not evaluated the state of where you're in right now? How about the people around you is just not the right people around you at that moment? How about if God sees that? How about if God sees the path that you're striving for and the timing that you're asking for, but it's not right, right? So the fear should turn to love, but love towards who? Who you're channeling your love to? And that's only our Creator. There is no way you can use that fear, right, and turning it to love, and then turning it to human beings that have limitations themselves. It doesn't make sense, right? Idealism, right, idolizing people, it's a strange act, right? Because we leave our passions and everything else into humans that have achieved great things because they have skill sets and everything else, but you don't know for you to garner the knowledge for yourself to understand, wait, that path is very questionable, and why am I leaving my fears with another human being, right? For example, I'll give you an example. Let's say music. When we're sad, where do we go to? At least in the Western world, where do we go to? We start putting on sad songs, right? If we're scared, we start putting on sad songs. And now we're looking for a soundtrack to what we're going through. But let me ask you something. When you're listening to music and you listen to sad music, does it amplify or does it take away the sadness? You need to ask yourself that question when you open YouTube or whatever you're listening to on Apple Music or whatever. Does the sad music amplify your feelings about what it is that you're going through, or does it take away, right? In my estimation, music only amplifies how you feel, and it just gets you in a deeper hole. It doesn't take you out of it. Taking you out of it is within you, the efforts, and then leaving those fears into God's hands and turning it to love, and then finding the love and connection that you have with God, and then using that love and connection to bring people more into reminding people of God is there with you, right? That is the mindset we should all strive for. But when we have this fear, constant fear of things, right? And it's cynical, right? It's just a cycle of just, I'm scared. As I mentioned in the last few podcasts, when you invest too much time in fear, it turns out to be pessimistic. So even when the good things come to you, where is the gratitude that comes from it? What are you thankful for the things that come with it? Because you invested so much time thinking about the negative side of you that you forget to have gratitude to what you have, and you also feel like you're taking things for granted, right? The simple thing of just waking up. How many people haven't woke up today? When you listen to this podcast, how many people have just haven't woken up today? That's a blessing in itself, right? Everything has its risk. But the fact that we haven't really calculated our risk in a proper sense and haven't calculated the blessings that God has given us is misleading to yourself, but it's also misleading to others. Because once you start having this fear, you start projecting that fear. I know there's a cliche saying of misery loves company, but you don't want to be the miserable person that builds that company afterwards, right? We create positivity. We don't create a negative company so we can project our misery towards other people. You don't want to end up being that person, nor do you want to be the elderly person, again, talking about this in the last episode, to stopping other people from achieving other things, right? So, what is fear? It's okay to be scared. Wallahi, it's okay to be scared. But to channel the scared, or to channel that fear into love, comes with a process. And that connection is only with God. That's the only thing you can do. Leaving that fear with other people, leaving that fear with other things is not going to give you a great outcome. It might give you the temporary feeling, that dopamine hit, right? This is why people resort into drinking or smoking or doing other salacious things that affect their livelihood or their human experience, right? But you have to start asking yourself, what is the proper sense of that? And I think that's the spiritual journey that everybody needs to go through, even for the non-Muslims or the people that are not Muslims themselves, need to go through a spiritual journey, right? And understanding what it is why do you have this fear and who's contributing to that, right? It's the devil's tactics to continue to constantly have those fears, and then projecting those fears on other people. Now you're an army of the devil, and you don't want to be in a position of that, right? So identify your enemy, and then ignoring the whispers that come into your head is one of the biggest factors of what it is to be a good believer. But secondly is to be a good human. Being a believer is one thing, but God has brought us on this earth to be a good human simultaneously. Sometimes we forget that some people are way too spiritual, and they do too much spiritually, and forget the human experience that actually becomes human, that actually makes you human, right? That's building relationships with others and everything else. The judgment of others comes with projection of your own misery and fear sometimes too, right? In the Quran, it's mentioned, obviously, that Allah says, I forgot which ayah specifically, correct me if I'm wrong, but for when you're making those judgments, God has reminded us to know that you've been there as well, too, right? So you need to when you start making judgments, before you do that, out of fear, again, because that's the biggest component of making those judgments, have you been there before? Right? And sometimes we forget. I always say one of the biggest things for us humans and the human error that we start striving for and that we need to remind ourselves is one, we're very forgetful, and two, we lack long-term vision. We're forgetful from the mistakes that we make, so that's why we make the constant mistakes every single time without continuing to remind ourselves. Plus, we start breeding new mistakes from those initial mistakes as well. And we also lack long-term vision because we're constantly bombarded with distractions and entertainment and all these other things that happen on a day-to-day basis that a lot of people, which I explicitly mentioned that I hate, is going with the flow, which is propagated for us humans to not even think about going further than the day that's present to us. Not saying we shouldn't be grateful and take the day for granted, but simultaneously is to plan things out so we can situate and structure ourselves with integrity, with principles and values. That's how you build values. But when you start thinking about just the moment, right? That's just the fear of not thinking of yourself in the future version of who you could be, right? Again, being scared, right? But being scared, again, is okay if you have everything. If you're taking calculated risks. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to be scared, right? Doing this podcast, I was scared, but I wasn't in fear of it, right? I wasn't in fear because I left it in God's hands. For those that are striving for goals and building something that can help people, especially if they're making something that can help others, then you should always think of why should I be scared for creating something positive for somebody else? What does somebody else need in their life? Do they need motivation? Do they need a change of mindset? Do they need encouragement, right? And for me, that's what this podcast is for, is to encourage others, is to make everybody else as positive as possible, even if when I'm in a negative place, or let's say I'm in a dark place or anything like that, because I'm sometimes human, right? Is to turn that into positivity and then spread that positivity to other people. But when you're at fear and constant fear of your life because you don't know how your life looks like down the line, then all you're going to do is breed negativity, and all you're going to breed is misery, and you just want company that comes with that. You don't want to be that person. So this is what I'm saying, like, the way I'm going to title this podcast is Don't Be Scared, Bro. Because I don't want people to feel scared, right? I don't want people to be in constant fear of what it is that they're actually striving for. I want that fear to translate into love, but also translate that love into something that could encourage and be positive, right? And to constantly remind people of what it is that they can truly be. But if you allow the doors to be closed constantly, and then you're not knocking on those doors anymore, then keep it to yourself, go back on the drawing board, and don't tell people, some of the people, about what it looks like to fail, but also it is a constant failure to do that because you couldn't do anything. I always say there's two ends of the sword when it comes to failure, right? There's the failure that comes with a lesson and it just builds your story, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast episodes, right? But then there's the failure that you constantly do, and then once you give up, right, you tell other people that failure because you failed. So you make sure those people should be in the state of fear all the time because you are, which is not fair. It's not fair for yourself, and it's not fair for the person that you're constantly telling that, yeah, that thing is not going to work. Especially if you know what's worse to me than that is especially you haven't experienced it yourself. For example, I'm building this podcast. Imagine somebody came to me and said, hey, yeah, this podcast looks like, imagine somebody said this podcast looks like it's a failure and it doesn't even look like it's going to pan out for somebody that hasn't even experienced it themselves. Would I be stupid enough to believe in what their failure looks like because they haven't experienced it yet? Well, a lot of us get stuck to that, right? If you're sharing ideas with somebody else and they constantly project their fear to you because they haven't tried it out themselves, then why are you asking somebody that hasn't experienced it at all? It doesn't even make sense. This is why mentorship is so important, especially in the niche or industry that you're in. If you're building a business and a company, it's good to find somebody that's doing the same thing that you've done, and either study what they've done and the path they've taken, or actually, if you can have access, is to get mentorship and get that help that you need. But to ask people that haven't experienced it is very silly to me, right? If you're in a position of if you're financially struggling, right, and you're poor or you're in a place of not making money as much, would you ask another person that's financially struggling how to make money? No. But we are constantly asking and sharing ideas with somebody that's not even striving for that, right? And to get to a level that is unfamiliar to them, right? But you're familiarized yourself with it because you're imagining yourself being in that place, right? It's one thing to share your ideas and somebody's contributing to those ideas because they have that same mindset, although their state of situation is not there because you guys are working together to get there. But it's another way of finding somebody's goals and aspirations are not even aligned with yours. That's a constant struggle for you, but it's also a constant frustration for yourself and others and then it just limits you completely. And then now we're asking the fear element. You're already fearful of bringing up this idea to somebody else that hasn't experienced it yet or hasn't even thought about it, right? But it's also another thing when somebody denies it because of their own scarcity of mindset and their fear of not achieving it. Now the fear starts to strive in to you or gets into you. So now you're in constant fear, and then that's when dreams die because you're not thinking further than what it looks like to build something towards that success that you envision yourself in. So this podcast is really about talking about fear, talking about being scared, talking about being okay with being scared, and then channeling into love and aspiration, and then also channeling it into building a connection with God and reminding yourself that God only holds the outcome to anything that you're building. And then also reminding yourself that God's guide you to those prayers initially in the first place, so then you can make those prayers, right? It's not a coincidence that you've made that dua or made that supplication to God. It's not a coincidence. God has guided you there for a reason, right? And for us, we should not have the fear of continuing to challenge ourselves with what the outcome looks like, because that we don't control. We don't control the future. That's not our job. Our job is to put the effort in and to be at peace with what the effort looks like afterwards, because you've prepared yourself so much. The only constant fear that you have or nervousness that you have is because you haven't prepared enough for it. And that's the constant issue that we may have as a society, and then surrounding ourselves with people that haven't really prepared at all too. So inshallah, I'll let you guys go. I know, just tuning into this podcast episode, hopefully it's helpful. I know it's been helpful for me to remind myself of this, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. All right.